to another episode of Galadari on Air. Today we will be speaking about franchise and intellectual property with Raka Roy. Raka is a partner and the head of IP and data protection at Galadari Advocates. We can see that this topic, franchise and intellectual property, is of interest to many in the UAE and further afield. Let's focus on franchise for a minute. How well accepted is this structure of business in the UAE? Is it common? And how does the UAE's legal infrastructure enable such ways of doing business?
In terms of franchise as business model here, I would say it is one of the most popular business models so far as UAE is concerned. It's one of the most highly accepted way for a foreign brand to come into the local market in a very seamless way. In many times, we have seen that it's actually a great thing for a foreign brand to actually do the testing of the market by not spending a lot on the entire infrastructure by themselves, but trying the way of how their brand and their business would do in this region and in this country through a franchise model. So that's one of the major things which attracts franchising as a very popular way of doing business. In fact, on the statistical side, I would say that as we speak, UAE actually has almost $30 billion of annual business being catered from the franchise sector. Of course, 70% of that is from the US market. It's mainly the US food chains, a lot of retail and clothing brands, which has gotten into the local UAE market through franchising. Of course, followed by that are brands from Italy, Canada, and Australia, and others. But of course, I would say that it is definitely something which caters very well from the commercial perspective. To give you a few names, in fact, the Apparel Group is one of the very popular Dubai-based franchise company which hosts several international fashion brands, including Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein, Nine West, Aldo, and many more. Then we have the Al Shaya Group, which is headquartered in Kuwait, but however, they have a very significant presence in the UAE. And Al Shaya is responsible for franchising brands like, being franchisee to local brands like Starbucks, H&M, Victoria's Secrets, Cheesecake Factory, and so on. So yeah, I mean, in terms of just to let you give you an idea that that's basically the level of synergy which foreign brands have through franchising over here. And in terms of the legal structure, it is very welcoming, given that as until now, there is no such strict statutory laws which guides or which kind of mandates franchising business. Most of the time, franchise agreement is dealt as similar to a contract which will be handled locally as per the local laws over here, or unless the contract actually has laws mentioned to be dealt by the foreign countries, which could be also a very typical scenario. It could also be governed by the agency laws because we've seen that I have dealt those kind of issues where in many times the franchise business has been governed by the local commercial agency law and it has been taken as the same relation as that of a agent and a principal. So yeah, I mean these are few nuances and elements to the local franchising business.
What are the main things to keep in mind if you are a franchisee?
The role of a franchisee and a franchisor are definitely similar and not similar in very different ways. Of course, when you are a franchisee, I would say the first thing that a franchisee needs to understand is that you are literally walking into the shoes of the franchisor, who is the actual owner of that business model and the brand. And at the same time, you are the one who will be responsible for running the show and operating that business locally in that country. So that's, I think, by itself, a huge thing in terms of responsibility and obligation, which a franchisee has to lead in terms of its role. Of course, adhering to the standards, because that's one thing which I'm sure most of the franchisors would be very clearly, maintaining in across the entire world. So that is something which one needs to adhere to because that goes on with the business model, the reputation, and the goodwill of the brand. Of course, making sure that the reporting and the financial obligations are well met. Training and assistance, that's something which the franchisee definitely needs to make sure that they are well trained. And if they are not, they need to definitely address that early on, just so that there is no gaps there, and they're quite seamlessly being able to run business through the trainings that they are going to be imparted. Of course, the end objective being that they should aim to think that they are growing the business together with the franchisor. It's nobody's separate business. In a franchisee, it is a business where you evolve and grow together. So, with that positive attitude, definitely the franchisee can make the best out of its role. In terms of quickly on the IP side, on the legal side, what should the franchisee keep in mind? I would say it is mainly that it is the licensing of intellectual property that happens through a franchise business. A franchisee is not the owner of the IP, but more of a licensed user of the IP. And that's something which needs to be clarified early on. Of course, it has the responsibility of safeguarding the IP. So if there is any infringement or violation, the biggest responsibility lies on the franchisee to immediately let the franchisor know, just so that steps are taken to rectify and correct that situation immediately. Of course, preserving the value goes with the way the brand will be handled and the business model will be seamlessly handled in the local country, and nurturing and adhering to the local laws, which goes basically with the compliance of what maybe that particular business asks for. I think in a nutshell, Yulia, that's basically what franchisees should be keeping in mind.
And how about franchisor?
Yeah, I mean, franchisor actually, of course, in a business like this, they are end of the day definitely the one who will be coming into the boardroom with higher rights. That's something that's a given, and that's something I think again early on it needs to be accepted, understood, and absorbed in this whole system, because the franchisor is actually the one who is setting the path to the business. It's their business process, procedure, and brand. So they have the bigger responsibility of setting that path very clearly ahead for franchisee anywhere that they are operating through a franchisee. Of course, they have to take their steps then to mention what will be the steps for safeguarding and strengthening the brand, which goes hand in hand with the kind of marketing and advertising campaigns or promotional steps that they would need to take. That's where definitely the franchisor has a role to play to make sure that these are done in a way that there is always an approval which is sought. And that is something which goes on to maintain the quality of the brand, the deliverables, and of course, in the manner in which the business is running. Seeking opportunities to expand is most of a bigger role which the franchisor has. Of course, it is also a target which the franchisee is given, but it is definitely also one of the biggest, responsibilities of the franchisor. And finally, handling the administration of the master franchise agreement, because that's the basic document which takes the entire business forward between the two parties, and administration of that agreement in a seamless way, making sure that the local laws are well adhered with and customized as per the local laws, is something which the franchisor definitely needs to take the first step on and then align with the franchisee. Now, quickly on what are the kind of legal roles or IP rights which a franchisor holds, or the kind of responsibilities that the franchisor have. I would say the most important thing is holding on to the IP rights. You're the owner of the IP right, you're the owner of the business model, you're the owner of the designs and the entire interiors of any store for that matter. So you do have to make sure that that's well covered locally by yourself. Over here, obviously the franchisor. The brand identity is well maintained. So there, the guidelines which needs to be drafted and handed over to the franchisee, making sure that those are followed, is definitely the responsibility of the franchisor. Preserving the brand standards, making sure that approvals are taken, making sure that regular audits are done by visits in the stores or in the region, to make sure that the franchise business being run is done well. That is definitely something which you have to take it in your side and do it. A consistency is maintained across anywhere, any of the stores that is being opened in a particular given region, and there should not be any difference. And if that is there early on, that needs to be addressed, which is definitely the responsibility of the franchisor. Again, one needs to remember that there is a lot of investment that the franchisee is doing. So if there are inconsistencies which you are seeing that is being there in the way the franchisee is running the business, that needs to be addressed at a very early stage, because otherwise it's a lot of waste of funds for the franchisee, because they've already moved on with the way they were doing business not being stopped, and then you cannot really, at a very mature stage, address all this. So yeah, something which needs to be remembered. And finally, of course, maintaining the entire IP portfolio in an updated format, keeping the renewals and the maintenance of those rights ready, getting an IP audit done on a regular way, just so that you know what are the rights which you can actually keep and take away. And of course, aligning with the franchisee on preventing any unauthorized use of your brand, your business model in the local region.
Can you please tell our audience a good recipe for a trade secret?
Yes, of course. Trade secrets is something, it's very close to my heart, and it's something which is a very interesting concept that I have always worked on and found very interesting during my work life. It's basically because it's an IP concept which doesn't have any laws around it. It cannot really have any law around it. So the basic thing about a trade secret is that it could be a secret technique or a secret manual or a recipe or even a prospect list or a pricing, which is basically considered as your own trade secret. A very typical example is the Kentucky Fried Chicken, the KFC recipe. The very popular fries that we all see has a very typical secret recipe, which has obviously never been registered as any IP through any of the government authorities. It is a secret which the company has maintained through years, and that's where the need of being extremely cautious on the confidentiality and the internal policy of the company and the employment policies of the company gets of paramount importance, because definitely you do not have anything else but those to protect the trade secret. So that's basically something. Of course, a few steps of how such an IP could be protected is a trade secret audit, which could be done from time to time, which can establish the protection and the compliance program. It is advisable to consider having a trade secret compliance officer specifically appointed if trade secret is one of the most important assets that you're holding, which is responsible for the entire revenue building of your business. Again, KFC has one such example. Coke or Coca-Cola is another big example. Both of them, their entire business runs the basis of the recipes of their beverage or the fried chicken. So having said that, they cannot but keep a compliance officer or spend that level of investments on these aspects, mainly because they need to maintain this asset confidentiality to the biggest level. Also advisable to have a written policy, internal written policy, which would include a clarity on how to identify and protect the trade secret. It demonstrates the commitment to protection. It educates and trains the franchisee on how exactly will they maintain confidentiality towards that trade secret, and also to make it known that a disclosure of that trade secret, or if there is any leak to that trade secret, there is an immediate result of termination of a franchise agreement that would happen, because obviously then it is one of the biggest damage that the franchisor would have faced. And yes, not just that, I would say that could be further qualified with the kind of damage claim that would be there, or the indemnity that would be there, that the franchisee would have to be faced with. Not just the franchisee, this can actually also be mentioned internally when it comes to employment contracts, because if there is a leak and if that is traced down, then definitely that is also a consequence which, internally could be harmful. So yeah, I mean, it's basically something, of course, that's why monitoring compliance is one of the most important steps which a franchisor needs to keep in mind if you are handling trade secrets. Just to mention that, well, this was more of saying how a franchisor should handle a trade secret concept. But then at the same time, one also needs to say that, well, not all the time, everything that the franchisor is claiming needs to be accepted by the franchisee. So if the franchisor comes up with a claim that this was a trade secret which has been breached, the first few things which a franchisee can do as a quick step to even understand whether at all this is a trade secret or not is to find out whether this is something which is already known outside the company. Because if there has been a leak already, or if the knowledge is already there outside the company, then they cannot be held responsible as the first one who has kind of maybe ignorantly given away this trade secret, and can be a great level of defense. Obviously, then also to see what are the measures which has been taken to guard its secrecy. So if that is very loosely held by the franchisor, then definitely, the franchisor cannot really be as strong. And you as a franchisee do have a great case there to come up and say, well, these are the parameters which were not even followed. So at the same time, the level of money which has been spent on developing it, and the value and the information which the company would hold as compared to your competitor. So these are things which one just needs to keep in mind if you are faced with a situation where you kind of unknowingly maybe malhandled the trade secret of the franchisor. These are my 2 cents for trade secrets.
You mentioned that recently you started to speak more about franchising in digital era. What are the potential pitfalls there?
See, of course, we can see the pace in which digital era is moving. I would say it's an unexpected level of speed in which business is growing in the digital world. And few things, the concepts of obviously metaverse and the cryptocurrencies and digital currencies are to add on to that. So having said that, of course, franchising is not a concept which I think would be left behind. It's something which will definitely catch up and is already there to an extent, but of course will be more prominently be there in maybe in the next few years in the digital era or the digital world. So the challenges where I think would happen is obviously an online infringement or the issues around global jurisdiction. There's a very heavy chance that jurisdiction when you go on a digital platform is lost, and you cannot really specifically streamline and say what issue would lie with what country or what jurisdiction, which has been there always as an issue. But then I do see that to be growing all the more, given that obviously it's going to get more and more complicated. Digital piracy, brand reputation management, data breaches and privacy, again, another thing which, it's a topic where there's been already a lot of movement. But then, given that franchising, again, is a business which is going to grow in this area, if there is a breach which happens in the level of personal data, then again, there will be issues which we would be seeing growing. An online dilution of brand, counterfeit of products, digital content licensing, and the legal challenges which are related to this. These are few of the pitfalls or, the challenges that I see could happen or is already there. Of course, what to expect and what are the things? What do you think then should we do is what I would say. So here I would say that the first thing that we need to make sure is to secure your digital assets. Make sure that the IP assets that you're holding are all safeguarded and are recorded and registered. Of course, build an online brand presence. Embrace e-commerce in its reality and with all its positivity, and to always work around that. Of course, work on collaboration and licensing in a very well-aligned manner. Prioritize definitely on data protection, and of course, go global with your IP rights. The reason why I say this is related to the global jurisdiction. Because if you are going digital, then there wouldn't be any territorial rights any further. Lines will merge and go blurred there. So if you do not have global IP rights registered, then there is a very heavy chance of you losing out on a particular issue just because you do not have rights in that particular jurisdiction. So yes, and be conscious about how then you can enforce those rights, and thereby, of course, taking those in your stride, fostering a continuous innovation. I think that's basically what I would say. Just to give you a little example, Yulia, that there's a lot of brands who have already actually entered the metaverse in a very positive presence. They have started licensing with the virtual worlds to the likes of Nike, Gucci, Coca-Cola, Adidas, Louis Vuitton. most of them have already gotten into licensing contracts with the gaming platforms and are legitimately there with their brands, effectively making the best out of that presence. As of now, it's more of a marketing and expansion way, but then it's not too far that metaverse or the digital world will be used on a more stronger commercial level, and that's when definitely these will be leveraged in a much better way. So yeah, I mean that's basically a note where I would say we can end in saying that this is where the future is going to, and I leave you with that.
Thank you, Raka, for these insights. If you have any questions regarding franchise, IP, or data protection in the UAE, please reach out to Raka on raka@galadarilaw.com. Raka will be happy to answer any questions you might have.